I've been talking about hand sewing needles and vintage needles, and here is that needle roll I made. I'm sorry I didn't get more detailed with that video with showing you actually how it finished up in the video, but it came out very nice, as you can see, and that's something you can throw in your pocketbook, in your bag, and always have your hand sewing with you. It's the modern needle card. Here are some, we're going to move to machine needles, but just as I was pulling those out, Singer and hand needles, they weren't always made in China. Here is a very nice set of vintage needles from around the 60s. That's when they were using the Salantomatic type packaging, and these are made in England. This is a little after that, early 70s maybe. I remember those packages in the 70s, made in England. And then this one, I don't know where these came from. I don't think they're Singer. They're just regular old hand needles, and they're made in China. Now, what I started to do, I have decided that if I use needles from Japan for Quilts for Veterans, I'm all set, no matter what machine I use, if I use either hand sewing or machine needles from Japan, because Japan is our ally, and Japan is in Asia, right near North Korea, so we're going to sneak in through Japan and get those 7,800 soldiers back. And I'm going to use Japan needles. That's when I can't afford the American needles, which are $5.50 a piece for the hand needles. But in the meantime, so I had the 237 out. I was thinking of putting a new needle in it, and I got all my needles out. Now these are vintage Singer needles that you can look for machine needles. This says printed in USA. These are the real oldies but goodies. They used to be called 15X1. They're now called 2020. Their average needle is called 2020. This is 2045 for knits. This is for knits. That's because I have a lot of woolens. Let's say, if any of these other, made in USA. Made in the USA. In fact, and I don't know how old those are as compared to the other packages, but many of these are marked made in the USA. But these are all machine needles. So there you go for finding American machine needles. You look for vintage Singers made in the USA. These were the latest Singers I bought. I was used to buying those packages. Then they came in these. And these are made in Brazil, which is their other plant. They manufacture in both China and Brazil. So these are modern. They're from Brazil. They look cheap. Sorry to say. They look cheap. They're not at all like the old needles. They're not even like these needles, which, now this one, I think, this one is made in West Germany. This one I looked is made in Brazil. And you can't tell, the camera won't focus, but they look cheap. Sorry, anybody who's from Brazil. Pretty sure these were made in Brazil too. Made in Brazil. So, obviously, the vintage manufacturing standards that we had in the United States for steel sewing machine needles was the standard. And I'm I'm not insulting any people in China, Brazil, Korea, anywhere. But as the manufacturing moved to other countries, maybe except for West Germany, the standards changed because they do things differently there. Now, I found this vintage package of Dritz, which is really what I needed to find, because believe it or not, these are made in Japan. Vintage Dritz needles made in Japan. No Name Universals, made in West Germany. And of course, Schmetz are made in Germany. Here's some more no names that aren't marked. And these, leather points, made in Japan. So you can do what I'm doing if you want, where you can pick a favorite needle type. I'm going by the country of Japan. So right now I've got ballpoint needles in size 16 and leather point needles in size 16. That's not going to help me make quilts, but at least I have some needles. I also have the vintage Singers that were made in the U.S. So if you can find these, you're using American-made machine needles. And as you can see, I have a lot of them. So now, this also extends, this is an original package for a treadle belt, and the part number is 25134. The belt itself is broken. It's an old one. But look at that. Made in the USA. Motor lubricant, because I have to lube that 237, and I have to figure out if this stuff is still good or not. This box is not marked at all. I didn't check the tube yet. But this is again from around the 60s, which is the year of the 237. And this does say, and all the foil's coming off, but it does say, made in the USA. So you can be discerning with machine needles the same way that you're discerning with hand needles. Brazil, Germany, the United States, Japan. One thing you have to watch out for, there's one, I went to look for sewing machine needle Japan search on eBay. And I got a company up that I think it's called Dasu, D-A-S-U maybe. Anyway, Japanese sewing machine needles. You look in the picture on the back of the package, made in China. So we're still talking vintage is better. And whenever you can find vintage sewing machine needles, it's better.